Welcome to Dialogue. This conversation is part of a series on the Jeffrey Epstein case and focuses on the brave survivors of this case.
And it's so important that we do that. For a long, long time, the public narrative was, it was all about the powerful people involved, the legal drama, the money.
Right, the shock of it all.
Exactly. But the true center of this story, the actual heroic core of this whole situation, is the group of survivors who just refuse to be erased.
And that's really the core insight for our deep dive today, isn't it? When you actually look at the evidence, the story of how this all came to light is their story. It's the story of their fight just to be heard.
It absolutely is. It was their collective courage that finally forced institutions and the public to look at truths that were being actively, systematically buried.
For decades in some cases.
For decades. We're talking about individuals who were up against not just their abuser, but the entire legal and social machine that was protecting him.
So our mission today, for anyone listening, is to really understand that hurdle, the almost unimaginable cost, psychologically, financially, that these individuals had to overcome just to be seen as credible.
And then what their voices, once they were unified, actually accomplished. How they revealed the mechanics of systemic failure at the highest levels of our society.
Yeah.
This is about institutional disbelief and the incredible strength it takes to break through it.
Okay, so let's unpack this right from the beginning. The whole story really has two timelines, doesn't it? There's the timeline of the crimes themselves.
Yes.
And then there's the timeline of the concerted effort to silence the victims after the fact.
That's a crucial distinction.
So when survivors began trying to come forward, often as young teenagers, the response wasn't about justice. It was immediately about protecting the powerful. What were the specific, repeatable actions taken to marginalize them?
The patterns are, honestly, chillingly consistent. The sources lay out this aggressive campaign designed specifically to neutralize the credibility of anyone who spoke up.
So you're not talking about just normal legal skepticism here.
No. This was an active institutional effort to undermine every single aspect of their account. Survivors were aggressively questioned and discredited, but we need to be clear about what that actually means in practice.
Okay, so break that down. How does that go beyond a standard level of legal scrutiny into what you're calling active discrediting?
It was a calculated strategy. It was about weaponizing the natural flaws of memory, especially memory under extreme trauma. So instead of interviewing a survivor to gather facts about the perpetrator,
Right, build a case.
the questioning would focus relentlessly on tiny inconsistencies in their recollection, gaps in time, or small variations between an interview they gave 1 year and another they gave 3 years later.
So the goal wasn't to find the truth.
The goal was to build a narrative that the survivor's entire testimony was fabricated or fundamentally flawed, not just that it was incomplete because of the trauma they endured.
Which immediately puts the victim on the defensive. Suddenly, they're the one on trial. They have to prove their own trauma, prove their own integrity, their own memory.
Exactly. It completely flips the script.
Yeah.
And it turns the legal system itself into another layer of psychological injury.
And this defense was backed by just an incredible amount of power.
An overwhelming amount. The power imbalance is, it's hard to even comprehend. You have these survivors, often young, often from low-income backgrounds, already deeply traumatized. And they're facing intimidation and direct threats of legal action from these huge, high-powered legal teams.
And these weren't just vague threats, were they? We need to be specific about what was being held over their heads.
No, not at all. We saw threats based on non-disclosure agreements, NDAs, that many of them have been coerced into signing much earlier.
Agreements they might not have even understood as minors.
Of course not. But they were still legally binding. And on top of that, the threat of defamation lawsuits was constantly used as a weapon.
You just imagine that.
Can you? You're maybe 18, you've survived this horrific abuse, and then you get a letter from a top-tier law firm saying that if you speak publicly, you will be sued personally for millions of dollars.
By a legal team with basically unlimited funding.
Right. That threat of complete financial ruin is designed to permanently silence almost anyone. It's a war fought with legal paperwork.
It's staggering. And then beyond the legal tactics, there's what might be the most insidious strategy of all. The idea that survivors were actively made to feel complicit in their own abuse. This is the tactic that really drives the silence inward.
It's the weaponization of shame.
Right.
And it's incredibly effective because the original grooming process already laid the groundwork for it.
What do you mean?
Well, grooming involves convincing the victim that they're special, or that they're benefiting, or that they have a responsibility to keep this secret. So when the legal teams come in years later and echo that same narrative, saying they consented, or they sought it out, or they profited from it.
It validates the victim's deepest, most private feelings of guilt and shame that the abuser put there in the first place.
Precisely. The abuser's defense team is essentially outsourcing the psychological manipulation that started years before. It replaces righteous anger, which is the energy you need to fight, with this paralyzing shame.
It just shuts them down.
Completely. The message is clear. You are damaged goods, and we will prove to the world that you're responsible for it.
So their motives were constantly under attack, in private and in public. They were framed as just seeking attention or money.
And that framing serves a dual purpose, and it's incredibly destructive.
So
It's the ultimate ethical distraction. If the public narrative is about the supposed greed or the character flaws of the victims, then nobody have to confront the horrific nature of the crime itself.
or the massive institutional failure that allowed it to happen.
Exactly. It shifts the entire conversation. It's no longer about it reduces a profound human tragedy to transactional cynicism.
And through all of this, we can't forget the fundamental vulnerability factor here. So many of these individuals were minors when the abuse happened and when they first tried to speak out.
This point cannot be overstated. It's so critical. Because they were minors, institutions found it that much easier to ignore them. The argument that was consistently used was that their memories were inherently unreliable.
Because of their age.
Because of their age, because of the trauma, because of the time that had passed. It's a very convenient narrative for any defense team.
But it seems so illogical. You have multiple unrelated individuals describing clear and consistent patterns of abuse. How could the authorities legitimately hold on to the idea that all of these children were just unreliable?
Because the goal wasn't to find the truth. The goal was to maintain the status quo and protect powerful people. If you can treat a survivor's memory as a flaw in the evidence, rather than a predictable symptom of profound trauma,
then you have a legal justification for doing nothing.
You do. If a child's testimony can be dismissed that easily, there's no real check on powerful predators. It creates this protective institutional bubble where the only people who could bring the system down are immediately discredited by the very people they're supposed to trust: police, prosecutors, judges.
It's a perfectly closed, self-sustaining loop of denial.
It is. And that denial system then moves from the outside world, from the institutions, into the deepest parts of the survivors' internal lives.
Exactly, which is where we need to go next. Let's shift from that external cruelty to the internal psychological reality, because this is where the story gets really, really heartbreaking.
It does.
What happens inside a person's mind when their severe trauma is not just experienced, but then actively dismissed and almost criminalized by the world? What are the long-term consequences of that specific 1-2 punch of abuse and disbelief?
The initial toll that survivors describe is extensive and just profoundly isolating. You see the immediate effects. Deep trauma, dissociation, and shame.
Let's talk about dissociation for a second, because I think it's a term people hear but might not fully grasp in this context.
It's a key psychological defense mechanism. The mind, to survive an experience that is too overwhelming to process, essentially disconnects itself from reality. The brain literally checks out because what's happening is unbearable.
So it's a survival tool in the moment.
A critical one. But it comes with a very severe price tag down the road, especially when the outside world denies your reality.
How so?
Because the dissociation doesn't just switch off when the abuse stops. Years later, when a survivor tries to recount what happened, their memory might be fragmented. They might struggle to connect their emotions to the facts of the story.
Okay.
Now, you combine that internal fragmentation with external institutional gaslighting. You have lawyers questioning your sanity, police suggesting you're confused, the media painting you as an attention seeker.
So the outside world is basically confirming the deepest fear that the trauma created in the first place, that you can't trust your own mind, your own perception of reality.
It's a catastrophic failure of support. The system is essentially telling the survivor, your brain's attempt to save you is now evidence that you are lying.
Wow.
It reinforces that immense shame we talked about, the shame that was so carefully cultivated by the abuser. So survivors are left in this constant state of internal conflict. And that's coupled with crippling fear and a deep, deep erosion of trust that poisons almost every future relationship.
Let's focus on that erosion of trust for a moment. Specifically, the inability to trust adults. or any kind of authority figure.
Mm-hmm.
If the very systems that are designed to protect you, law enforcement, the courts, if they actively dismiss you or, even worse, protect your abuser who is left to trust.
There's no one.
Hmm.
The implications for the rest of their lives are just monumental. Trust is the foundation of society, of relationships. If your earliest and most impactful experiences with authority teach you that the system isn't just broken, but is actively rigged to protect the powerful,
You enter adulthood completely armored. You're cynical, you're isolated.
it creates hypervigilance. Every new interaction, whether it's with a new boss, a romantic partner, a doctor, is filtered through this lens of potential betrayal and exploitation.
And the places society tells us are safe courtrooms, police stations.
To them, in their lived experience, those are the most dangerous places of all. This makes it incredibly difficult to form secure attachments, to pursue career paths that involve traditional power structures. It's just a constant, exhausting battle against isolation.
And we know this isn't a story that just ends when the abuse stops. The documentation is clear about the long-term mental health struggles that follow.
Absolutely. Recovery in these cases isn't just about healing from the initial crime. It's about having to reconstruct your entire sense of self and reality after it was systematically shattered.
Not once, but twice.
Repeatedly, first by the abuser and then again by the justice system. We're talking about chronic, complex PTSD, severe anxiety, persistent depression, even physical manifestations of trauma.
And it's all compounded by that sense of injustice.
It is. The trauma is layered. You have the original abuse,
Oh.
then the gaslighting by the perpetrator, and then the systemic betrayal by the institutions that were supposed to help. Each one of those layers needs its own separate, intensive healing.
And when you listen to the survivors themselves summarize their experience, the most painful common thread seems to be that profound isolation, that initial belief that no one would ever believe them.
Yes.
And for years, the evidence shows no one did.
That isolation is the central pillar of the long-term suffering. When the societal mechanisms for validation just completely fail, the victim internalizes that rejection. They stop fighting because they start to believe this systemic lie, that they're alone, that they're unreliable, that maybe they were somehow complicit.
And that's what allowed the abuse to continue for so long.
It's the key factor. It's the cost of a silence that was enforced by a system built for disbelief.
Which brings us to the turning point. Because if these institutional forces were so powerful, so dedicated to maintaining that silence, how did the change finally happen? What was the shift that finally forced this case out of the shadows?
Well, the shift certainly wasn't a gift from the justice system. It was driven entirely by the survivor's own agency, their refusal to stay silent anymore.
They took back control of the narrative.
They did. The source material is completely unequivocal on this. The key moment was what you could call an act of collective courage. They just started speaking publicly and refusing to be silenced.
Even knowing the immense risk.
Knowing the immense risk, that decision to step out of the shadows was the single most pivotal move in this entire saga.
They basically realized that the formal channels, the police, the courts, were, for them, a dead end.
They were either compromised or just totally ineffective, so they created their own channel for the truth.
And they did that by engaging with journalists, right?
A crucial strategy. They started connecting with investigative reporters to completely bypass the corrupt systems that had failed them over and over again. This wasn't just telling their story. It was a high-stakes tactical decision.
To move the fight from the courtroom to the court of public opinion.
Exactly. From closed, manipulated legal proceedings where their testimony could be buried, into the public sphere, where the pressure of global opinion could finally be brought to bear.
And a huge part of that was that they started supporting one another.
That mutual support was the psychological and legal engine that drove the entire breakthrough. The moment they realized they weren't isolated, that their stories aligned in perfect, chilling detail,
The narrative of the unreliable, opportunistic victim just completely falls apart.
it disintegrates. Because when dozens of voices are echoing the exact same experience of grooming, of facilitation, of systemic dismissal, it stops being an accusation, and it becomes a fact.
It gives them the collective credibility they need to withstand the institutional counterattack that they knew was coming.
It does. This mutual support allowed them to build a voice that was just too loud, too consistent, and too compelling for the world to keep ignoring. Their shared bravery was the ultimate turning point.
But we absolutely have to talk about the immense personal price they paid for that victory, because it really shows why speaking out was such an act of extraordinary strength.
The cost was staggering, both emotionally and financially. In order to seek justice, They had to intentionally relive the worst moments of their lives over and over again.
Through depositions, interviews.
Lengthy, hostile depositions, intense cross-examinations in court, aggressive media interviews. They were essentially asking the world to validate their deepest trauma. And that process itself can cause profound psychological harm.
And once they went public, their entire lives were put under a microscope.
Absolutely. They faced intense public scrutiny. They risked reputational damage simply for telling the truth about what happened to them as children.
In a culture that is still, unfortunately, very quick to blame the victim.
Very quick. So speaking out meant putting their careers, their future relationships, their entire identities on the line. And then on top of all that, they had to deal with the constant wave of online harassment.
Which is really a modern form of intimidation, isn't it? It ensures the fight is 24/7.
It never stops. Faceless, anonymous accounts, relentlessly undermining them, threatening them, spreading lies about them, trying to discredit them in real time. So just picture it. You're fighting this global power structure in court, and at the same time, you're dealing with this nonstop, malicious torrent of digital character assassination.
The level of resilience that requires it's almost unimaginable.
It truly defines extraordinary strength.
And their courage didn't just expose a single predator, it exposed the predictable mechanics of an entire system, an entire network.
Yes, and that's the bigger impact. Their unified voices provided a comprehensive roadmap of how organized exploitation actually works. They illuminated the clear, structured patterns of grooming.
The step-by-step process.
The sophisticated step-by-step process used to isolate victims, gain their trust with gifts and promises, and then manipulate them into silence and dependency. It proved the abuse wasn't random. It was a standardized, repeatable methodology.
They showed how predictable it all was.
The consistency across so many accounts proved it was a calculated method. And critically, their testimony finally brought the essential roles of the facilitators into the light.
The enablers.
The network of people who actively recruited, managed, and enabled the whole system. And this was so vital because it moved the focus beyond just the main perpetrator to the entire infrastructure that supported him.
Let's talk about those facilitators for a moment. What kinds of roles are we talking about, and why was exposing them so important?
Exposing them proved the systemic nature of the crime. The facilitators included people who managed schedules, travel, security, property, but also, significantly, people who provided the legal and financial cover.
So professionals.
Highly educated professionals, lawyers, accountants, personal assistants. Their participation was essential to maintain this facade of legitimacy and immense wealth. Without them, the abuse couldn't have happened on this scale across international borders for so many years.
Every single one of them was a conscious point of complicity.
That's what their testimony showed. It proved the network-like nature of the entire system. The abuse was tied to this web of social and professional connections that protected and legitimized the whole operation.
And finally, they revealed the precise weaponized way that vulnerability was manipulated.
They detailed how the network systematically targeted young people based on economic need, emotional fragility, or a lack of strong family support. They showed how promises of education, of modeling careers of a better life were used as bait to secure cooperation and later to secure silence.
So the bottom line, when you synthesize all of their accounts, it's undeniable.
It is.
Their voices exposed a truth about systemic failure, that the justice system, the government, and powerful institutions were actively refusing to see. Without their willingness to endure the unimaginable cost of breaking that silence, this case would still be a secret. That network would probably still be functioning.
That is the ultimate summation of their impact. They forced the truth into the open by sheer force of will, bypassing the established mechanisms of power because those mechanisms were compromised. Everything we know today about the systemic nature of this crime exists because they were determined to be heard, no matter the personal cost.
It's a story of profound moral victory over institutional corruption.
It truly is. And if we connect this all to the bigger picture, the survivors aren't just victims who sought justice. They are the fundamental reason this story is known around the world. The only reason the world was finally forced to listen. Their actions completely shifted the focus from the powerful to the consequences felt by the vulnerable. And this raises a really important question for all of us going forward. What responsibility do institutions, legal, governmental, media, what responsibility do they have to ensure this pattern of initial dismissal and aggressive silencing is never repeated?
That question really cuts to the heart of institutional trust and integrity, doesn't it? Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into such a crucial aspect of this case.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please like, subscribe, and share this video. Also, let us know in the comments what really stood out to you in this conversation and if there's any related topic or new topic that you would like covered in a future video.